A gentleman in England married again. In the 11th hour he had a son, Thomas Coleman, brother to a queen, Reggie's Cayley, inheritance stream.
In my studies of religion and the ancient world of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, I was surprised by how thoroughly Estolia and her influence on the culture and infancy of civilization was obscured. Though I searched diligently, I found only 3 references to Sentrath. The first was one of the few surviving maps of Sentrath created by Estolian mapmakers. It was a source of both profit and misdirection to early Estolia. It detailed the coastal and port cities ringing the western Mediterranean, or Sentrath, as Estolians called it. But Estolia was masked as the hazardous rocky island called Pequeño, and as a result, marauders considered it inhospitable. Xavier Archimedes Zakarian, Capítulo 86.
He was checking his Christmas TV dinner when something made him uneasy. Closing his oven, he straightened up and looked around his kitchen. What was it? It was so silent he could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock. Once he made that observation, he understood. The staccato sound of the driving rain had finally eased off. It was the silence, the absence of the sound of the storm, that he was hearing. He turned off the stove, but when he reached for the oven door handle, he frowned and then looked from the clock, to the window and to the kitchen door. What if he heard something else? What if a coyote was menacing his herd? Or the new little princess? He could not risk it. His dinner would wait. He also wanted to make sure that she was settling into her new surroundings. Any excuse to go look at her was worth it. He went to his kitchen door and pulled his oil slicker off the hook, putting it on before pulling the door open. With a whistle, Capulet, his Australian shepherd, jumped to his feet and followed him out of the kitchen. Everything was quiet in the stable, but predators could be quite stealthy. He would not be content until he saw the new filly and reassured himself that she was safe. She nickered softly when he turned on her light. He entered her stall and was thrilled when she came right up to him. She was everything he wanted. He picked up a brush and spent some time grooming her. He was just stepping out of the stall when Capulet growled and looked towards one of the empty stalls at the far end of the stable. Nate set a hand on Capulet's head, quieting him. Together man and dog went slowly, stealthily towards the unused end of the stable block. As they drew even with the final stall, he felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. On the ground in front of the closed stall door he saw muddy tracks. Small footprints, of the human variety. Cautiously he unlatched the top half of the stall door and prepared to swing it open. With a glance towards his canine companion he took a deep breath, flipped the stall light on, and pulled open the door. His first impression was a mop of red curls and a dirty face. He wished it was a coyote or a wolf. Those he could deal with, but what was he supposed to do with a child? He looked again at his dog, and Capulet whined at him, as if to say that he didn't know what to do either. Reluctantly he opened the stall door. It was below 40 degrees. He could not leave the child out in the stable. When he approached her, she lifted her arms to him. He was taken aback at the trust in her grubby face and hesitated only a second before picking her up. Spying a filthy blanket, he picked that up, and then left the stall. As he flicked off the lights, Capulet danced happily around his legs, excited by this new element in his universe. When Nate reached the stall of his new princess, he looked in on her one more time before closing the door and flipping off the lights. Back in his house, he was not sure what he was supposed to do with the small human being in his arms. He looked around his bachelor kitchen and could not figure out what to do with the child. With a grunt, he decided to keep her close while he called for help. Settling her to the counter, he picked up the phone and dialed the operator. The sun was shining brilliantly down on the paddock 4 months later. Nate was admiring the new addition to his herd that was foaled the previous night when the sheriff's car slowly came to a halt next to the fence. Nate finished his inspection of the new foal, a leopard-spotted Appaloosa filly, before turning his attention to the sheriff.
I don't reckon I ever really paid much attention to yon miniatures.
The sheriff said.
But they really are beautiful. I can see why you breed them.
Nate inclined his head and looked back at the 3 mares and the tiny foals who were gambling in the sweet winter grasses.
They have their challenges, but they are much easier to manage than a wife or kids.
The sheriff chuckled. After several minutes spent watching the foals, the 2 men turned away once all 3 seemed to decide simultaneously that it was supper time.
Thought you'd like to hear what we learned about the babe you discovered in your stable.
The sheriff said. Nate was not sure he really cared all that much, but the sheriff wanted to tell him.
She had the name Cater and Cicero written on her arm. Doc Marshall thinks she's about a year old. Until we find out who she is, Doc says we'll just set her birthday as January 1st. Her clothing was 20 years out of fashion, and her blanket was a Kmart special.
Nate just grunted. Suddenly he wondered.
You're not fixing to tell me I have to take her, are you?
The sheriff shook his head.
Because we don't know when we'll discover her real parents. She can't be adopted out. Bob Kettinger over in Barstow tells me that it's not likely we'll ever figure it out. All the evidence was in the warehouse that burnt up last week.
He shrugged.
Thanks for letting me know.
Nate said. His eyes turned back to the new foal, no longer concerned with the young child that had for a day made his life too exciting.